Hello, and welcome to Glass Half Full Reviews, Television Edition! Today I am going to be reviewing the latest episode of Game of Thrones, which is called The First of His Name. Now, in terms of how I'm actually going to go through this episode, I'm going to kind of talk about the plot lines as opposed to going it exactly scene by scene. I just think it will make a little bit more sense to go that way. Now, as such, I should say, there will be spoilers for the show, but not for the books, at least not for this particular video. I have actually read all of the primary books in the Song of Ice and Fire series, up to a Dance of Dragons around somewhere, and of course I've seen all of the show. But that being said, I wouldn't call myself a huge purist. I am always willing to accept good changes and adaptations if it actually works. But on the other hand, if I feel like maybe the creators of the show didn't make the right call, I will be happy to bring that up to you. I think that already happened once this season in something that I'm not going to get into right now, but in general, I feel like the show does a pretty good job of adapting these books into a television show. Alright, so the first plot line I want to talk about is the Cersei one. Now, I say the Cersei one because everything revolves around her. Sure, it starts with Cersei seeing her son get crowned, and yes, we see a little bit of the eye-catching with Tommen between him and Margaery, but really what it comes down to is how Cersei is seeing this and how she's reacting. Yeah, there's little things here and there in the scene, like how Tywin he's like, yes, long may he reign, and we can tell because, this is really the best move for him. He's pretty happy about this particular move, actually. Tommen was aged up for the show, just like basically every single character, and it's hard to say whether or not I think it's better or not than the books. It's a different kind of story, but I'm not displeased with it. I think how they're handling it makes sense, in that he's still kind of a little innocent, but he's not completely innocent, because obviously he had Joffrey as an older brother, so he can't be completely innocent. But he still has that kind of childishness about him that you feel like you hope it doesn't get too sexual, because then it gets a little creepy, as we see later on from some other scenes, which I'll get into later. One of my favorite parts about this scene was when Cersei just popped up into frame, and that was some great directing right there. And it makes you feel like, oh, she's going to actually do something. She's going to say something to really cut down on this. But no, wait. She's not. So why? Why did she do this? And I think if you actually start to look at the different interactions Cersei has throughout the episode, I think it becomes pretty clear. Because first, she's talking to Margaery. She's talking about, maybe it would be okay. Maybe we should have our fathers talk to each other and arrange this match after all. And what do we know about Margaery's father? Oh, well, that he's one of the judges for Tyrion's trial. And we also know that Cersei is dead set on seeing Tyrion dead. Now, of course, as the audience for the show, we know Tyrion had nothing to do, at least explicitly, with the death of Joffrey. But Cersei obviously doesn't see it that way. So how much is she really lying to Margaery about how much she knew about the problems with Joffrey? I don't think it's quite clear. She might be pretending and lying a little bit to herself as well as Margaery, or maybe she is saying something honestly, but, it doesn't really matter. Obviously, she didn't want to see Joffrey dead. But this is one of several olive branches she extends in, I would say, more uncharacteristic fashion. And considering just, an episode ago, she was worried about Margaery getting her claws in Tommen. Accurately, she was right. But, yeah, I had an episode right before that where she basically countermanded Marjorie's request to disseminate all the leftover food to the poor. Nope, give it to the dogs. So I wouldn't call this turning over a new leaf much as trying something a little bit more clever. She's actually playing this game, and I think Margaery knows sort of what's going on, but she's not 100% sure. She's no Olenna, so she's not her grandmother. She doesn't pick up on everything. But, that being said, I think she's more than happy to play along and, give her a few jabs here and there. Oh, should I call you mother? Should I call you sister? Yeah, exactly. Of course, the next time we see Cersei, she's talking to Tywin, her father. And obviously the third scene, she's talking to the third judge, Oberyn. So I think once you put it all together, you can have a clear sense of what this episode is trying to make us think, maybe a subtle way, but I think it's pretty clear that this is really all about Cersei trying to get something done. And we can't trust for a second that after the trial is over, assuming anything happens, which I'm not going to say, that she's going to hold to any of her promises at this point. Because why would she? She doesn't really care about that kind of thing. She cares about vengeance. Now, she might find it convenient to withhold some of these agreements, but I don't think she wants to marry Loras. Of course not. No, she wants to see vengeance. So she pretends, she talks to her father like, yes, I care just as much as you do about the legacy. But inside, you can tell she's thinking about how much she still resents how low she is on the totem pole, being forced to actually get into this marriage. And Jaime, although he's been disowned, it's almost like it doesn't matter. Whereas for her, she doesn't have that kind of option. So, even with all that, Tywin seems to be giving her a little bit of respect. He's revealing the stuff about the Iron Bank of Braavos. And this is one of those interesting things, because this doesn't come up exactly the way it is in the book, but the Iron Bank is something that I think is an important thing to bring up at all. It's not exactly how it happens, but I think that there's a lot of ways that they could go with this. And in some of the stuff that we saw from previews, I feel like maybe it's just making sure we have some idea about what this Iron Bank is, just so that we're not surprised when more references or maybe some characters involved with the bank show up later. At least that's my interpretation. So this scene was sort of an excuse to push this agenda of Cersei trying to influence the judges, but also let's toss in a little bit of that Loras stuff, which may or may not happen, plus this Iron Bank stuff, which is still kind of a huge, we have no idea what's going on with that. And finally, the Cersei arc concludes with her talking with Oberyn Martell, and it's interesting because there's sort of a quasi-flirtatious thing going on there where these are two attractive people, but they're also so opposed in terms of their families that they could never really hook up unless it was some kind of hate sex thing, and I just don't see that happening for these two. I mean, the show could surprise us and put them together like that. That just seems like it wouldn't happen. And I think definitely Jaime would be pretty unhappy about it, but, well, he doesn't really have a complete say in it anyway. Obviously, Cersei is actually, I think, thinking things pretty clearly in a lot of ways. She's really targeting exactly the kind of thing to make Oberyn potentially take her side. She's not really using pure logic, because if it was pure logic, then it doesn't really make sense to say that Tyrion did anything. It's really about the emotion. It's, remember, you had someone who was close to you that was also killed, and you want vengeance, so I want vengeance. See? We're a perfect team. Now, I think if we take all these people together, what's going to happen? I mean, Marjorie's father, we've already seen him as sort of like an ineffectual guy. He's not really said very much. Olenna was basically like, oh, no, the women are talking. Get out of here. It's the adults. Go, go. So he's probably going to do whatever Tywin tells him to do. And as for Tywin, it's really about what he thinks is best for the family. If he thinks Tyrion has really shamed the name of the Lannisters, I don't think there's any question that he would just say, yeah, kill him. But if he feels like there's something else going on, maybe he wouldn't. And of course, with Oberyn, I think it's still a wild card. I think another important thing about the scene was just bringing up Myrcella again, because we haven't really heard from her in 2 seasons. Ever since Tyrion had that great little scheme back in the day, and that's probably a good idea if it's ever going to come up again. And it's certainly a way to make us sort of care a little bit more about Cersei. At least try to paint her as more than just, oh, she's the anti-Tyrion, which she is, but maybe it's not quite so simple. We do have a few horrible people that are just completely evil, and there's one of them at least in this episode. We also saw that with Joffrey, of course, and with Ramsay Bolton. But most of the characters just aren't that black and white. They're complicated. Most of them will do terrible things, and sometimes they have good reasons, and sometimes they don't. And to see how they actually interact and how they change, that's what's interesting about the series. I want to move on to another entirely independent scene. We see the stuff with Daenerys all the way over in Meereen. They have just heard about Joffrey through whatever kind of messages that have percolated across the ocean. It's taken an entire episode, which is who knows how much time, and it's really hard to say, considering that if you look back in the first season, how long it took for them to actually find out about Robert dying, it was a little like, well, I don't really know. It's all kind of all over the place. On the other hand, Marine is a bigger city, so I guess you could conceivably see them finding out earlier. But what's interesting to me is what the show seems to be trying to do in setting up the different interactions between Daenerys and her various different men folk. I mean, you got Barristan over there, who's just sort of this is the guy, I give the best advice I can, and hopefully you're not crazy like Mad King Ares. You got the friend zone Jorah over there, who's just, oh, Khaleesi, come on, we can, yeah, Queen, everyone's going to follow you, just like I do. And obviously Dario, well, he's more I'll just do what I want. And clearly Daenerys likes that because it's a reflection sort of her own mentality. This kind of, oh, devil may care, I do it just because I like to do it. And she doesn't want to show any kind of weakness. But I liked how this scene happened. Even though it was very short, it was good to get a little bit of glimpse into that, show the connection. Hey, this is actually still in the same world. I was glad to see that. I think this scene came across pretty well. And I really liked that they brought in this really important ending where she says that she's there to rule, which is, I think, a very important decision. It really basically speaks to what she thinks is important to her morally and ethically. I guess I wasn't sure if they were going to include this or not, but I'm glad they did. I'm glad we're seeing this as she wants to be more than just a conqueror. She wants to demonstrate her value. I think that came across pretty well. So if we look back at the whole Cersei arc, I would call that is pretty good, and I call the Daenerys one also pretty good. And then let's move on to a different segment. Before I move on to the final two big arcs, I just want to touch on the two small little ones, the Brienne Pod and the Arya Hound. So this is two more of the trying to gain respect in sort of proportionate ways to each other. In one case, the Hound and Arya are sort of gradually learning about each other and trying to, teach each other types of their own mentality. And on the other hand, it's Brienne and Pod slowly coming closer together in the mentality too. Brienne is sort of obviously starting off like, ugh, look at this idiot. He doesn't know how to even fight. He doesn't know how to camp. He doesn't know how to forage. He doesn't know how to live outside. But, over time, she starts to begin to get a little bit of respect. She starts to understand his loyalty and why people maybe actually value this guy. And maybe she will too. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they're going to hook up. I don't think so. That would be kind of odd, I would say, considering the show is strongly implied that Brienne has feelings for Jaime, although they could just be, really deep down closeted feelings that she doesn't want to actually express. And considering what we know about Pod, he is good with the ladies, and Brienne is a girl, technically. So with Arya and the Hound, I thought it was interesting. We did hear her give her list of names, which is a little bit different from the books, mainly because the Gendry is kidnapped by Stannis plotline, and hey, I haven't seen that guy in a while, have we? Anyway, the Gendry plotline didn't really happen the same way in the books, so she's adding a few different people, the Red Woman, Beric Dondarrion, Thoros of Myr, but it's not like they didn't do some terrible things, or at least we think so. And I also think that it's interesting that Arya was so obvious about saying, oh yeah, you're on the list, Hound. I like the way that staging was done in the scene where the Hound is sort of like impressed, but also kind of like, guess I need to keep watching my back around this one. And that continues on to the later parts where he's basically just teaching her, but really roughly, because that's kind of his way. He hits her, but he's giving her valuable lessons, at least from his perspective. And the truth is, there is value to what he was saying. We didn't see Syrio Forel die, although it's kind of assumed that that's what happened, but he didn't have any armor. He didn't even have a sword, whereas he was fighting off against someone with full plate armor. And he did very well for himself, but it's really hard to defend yourself. So it seems to be that the lesson the Hound is teaching is you have to take every advantage, no matter what. And obviously we've seen from his own history that that's kind of his perspective too, especially from that little scene with innkeeper. Of course, Arya seems to have a different perspective on things. And I thought it was also interesting that they brought up the Mountain, the Hound's brother, because Arya didn't exactly have very much interaction with him. In the books, it's a little bit different. There's a lot more reason for her hatred of this guy. And I think that it's obvious from what we heard, especially in the first season, before he was recast, about how monstrous the Mountain was, especially to his own brother. So I guess it remains to be seen exactly what's going to happen with this guy. But I wouldn't take anything for granted. Alright, I want to move on to the Sansa storyline. Now, a lot of people love to hate on Sansa, and I am not one of those people. For me, Sansa is a very strong character because of how she's managed to survive in a way that I don't think any of the other Starks could have managed. If Arya was in the same situation, she would have lashed out and probably have been killed by Joffrey way earlier. And any of the men would have not really been in a much better situation either. But Sansa, she knows how to accept things. She knows how to live despite everything being thrown at her. At no time has she ever really thought about dying, except once, right after her father is killed in season 1, in that final episode of that season, where she's looking down and thinking, maybe I'll jump, and then she looks at Joffrey and thinks, no, maybe I'll take him down with me. And of course, at that point, the Hound stops, but I think it's pretty clear to me that Sansa isn't just some weak character. A lot of that I feel like maybe is a little bit of a sexist thing, but from my perspective, I find her storyline to be very interesting because it's not just about, these are just the big, fights and deaths. It's more about the intrigue, about her learning about how people really are. And of course, we see that from Littlefinger. He introduces her as his niece, Elaine, and we can see it's pretty clear that he has mixed feelings about Lysa, although obviously she does not at all have mixed feelings about him. And I think that it was interesting the way it was revealed about how Littlefinger essentially was responsible for the entire show, essentially starting off. Now, some people have, I think, said, that means he planned everything. He expected everything to happen. And I think that's ridiculous. As we saw from last season, a big part of his driving force is this push towards chaos, and his feeling like, once I get that chaos out there, I'll be able to use that to somehow get to the top. And what he was doing with everything that he did with Jon Arryn and the Lannisters and the Starks, it was really just, how do I get more power? Because remember, before the first season, he wasn't a landowner. He wasn't really a lord, even though he was called Lord Baelish. That was just sort of a title because he was an advisor. But because he actually betrayed Ned, suddenly he has Harrenhal. Now he can actually pursue some of the things he really wants. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like the show gets a little bit hammy with Littlefinger, making it a little too obvious. There was a little bit of that this episode, but in general, I thought it was a more subtle performance from him, where he didn't reveal everything. Where Lysa started to talk, he's like, hold on, let's put a stop to that. What I really want to see is more Sansa finding out about this kind of thing. I guess I don't know if anything happened in the episode about that, because we didn't see it, but I would like to see that. Obviously, there's the entire creepy aspect of it, where they're both basically sort of using Sansa as kind of like, this is almost like Catelyn again, and I feel like Lysa has kind of a good handle on this, because it's clear that Baelish is definitely interested in Sansa in some kind of creepy way, in that kind of mirror of the Marjorie Tomlin thing, except more so, because, it's a different kind of manipulation. So Lysa is being perceptive about it. She's crazy, but she's crazy and getting a little bit of it too. So when finally Sansa bursts into tears and saying, "Oh no, please, I swear," she's telling the truth, but she's also not telling the truth. And I think that's good, because we can see this arc of Sansa actually learning how to deal with people, how to manipulate people, maybe. In this case, it's another example of her surviving as she needs to. So in general, I think this is one of the strongest parts of this episode. Some of the other ones don't work quite as well for me. I mean, it was nice to see a little bit of Pod and Brienne. Sure, why not? They tossed in Arya and the Hound. Fine. Not a big deal. Even though I always like to hear the Syrio Forel, shout out because he's a great character. But I wasn't, blown away by those things. It was really kind of filler for me. And to me, although there was a little bit of filler with the Sons and stuff, it was more like this is it's like a building of tension. Like something really happened here. So to me, that part is more interesting. And so finally, we have North of the Wall. And I guess I'm mixed about this because although I liked a lot of the stuff that happened in the way the scenes came across, I don't know how much it really mattered in some sense. I like how Locke just sort of showed up and he had this secret plan and then, he's dead. On the other hand, it almost seems like, well, what's the point? Why did we bring him up? Why did we do so much backstory with him? So there's no connection to Jaime anymore, for example. There's no connection to the Boltons. Is anything going to happen with that? Who knows? Now, of course, also we saw things that paid off, like, Carl getting killed essentially because of a woman that he was abusing, although Jon actually took the killing blow. But that kind of catharsis only happened because they set him up as a horrible character already. So we had the catharsis because it happened. It seemed like we just needed another terrible person. Look how great Jon is. And I do like what they're doing with Jon. One of the problems I felt like I had was because we didn't have his perspective like we do in the books where we get inside his head, sometimes he just didn't say very much. We just didn't have a handle on what he was doing or thinking. He was just sort of moping around. So finally, it's nice to see him in action, leading people, doing something interesting. And it was great to see him finally reunite with Ghost, and I have no idea how much they're going to actually use him, because obviously using the wolves is not exactly a cheap thing, but I'd be happy to get as much of that as we can, because it's just such a cool character, to be able to interact with a wolf like that. So I was glad to see that. Now, as for the Bran part, I'm also mixed on this. I guess the whole Mira thing was just artificial tension, because either she was going to be assaulted and then it would have just been just terrible, unforgivable for the show to have gone that far, because it doesn't happen in the book and there's no real point other than, let's have another character get raped. So other than that, I feel like what actually happened was almost we're building it up a little bit, but either something really terrible was going to happen or she was going to get saved. And neither one of those things was that great. It just seemed artificial to me. I didn't care for that. I thought it was a bad choice in the writing. I did, though, like some of the stuff, how they're showing Jojen and how his visions are kind of working. And in that kind of weird mix, and how that must be disconcerting for someone, and you can understand why that would affect someone negatively. I kind of like that idea. I kind of like that perspective. Of course, there is a little bit of this is just mystical stuff, and the Bran chapters were always kind of iffy in the books. It was mostly a lot of long stretches just walking places and talking and having mystical dreams and the like, and I get it, they want to have more action with him. I just don't know if it really worked. I did like, though, what they did with Hodor, because not only is it something that we kind of wanted to see, we wanted to actually see, finally Hodor somehow take revenge, even though he can't because he's just kind of like a child in his mind. But we also see the aftermath where he's looking at his hands and thinking, who knows what he's thinking, but it can't be good for him. And so there is that aspect of Bran has clearly done something not right. Even if he needed to do it to survive, he made some kind of moral choice. And of course he had to make that other choice of, no, we can't let Jon see us or else he'll make us stay. I mean, maybe. It seems like a bit of an excuse. I like that you had to have Bran actually make a choice. Okay, I'm going the wall. I'm going. I'm actually going to go try to find this giant red tree, but I don't know. I guess the Bran storyline to me was always the weakest in the books anyway, and it's kind of the weakest here, especially because I like the characters of Mira and Jojen a little bit more in the books. I feel like they're not quite as well fleshed out here. I guess if you're going to be expanding their storylines, I want to see a little bit more out of the personalities of some of the other characters. In general, though, I think the episode was pretty good. It may have been weak in some sense compared to some of the others in the season, a lot of setup and the like. I think we have a lot of building blocks put in place for what's coming ahead. And I'm excited to see what happens. I mean, we've already had some interesting divergences from the books, and who knows what other ones we might have. I don't mind being surprised. I think that, for me, I just don't want to see things that move away from the spirit of the books. I don't want to see any betrayals of the material. But other than that, I say, hey, do what you like, and if it ends up with a good show, that's all I care about. All right. Thanks for stopping by.